You know, that is really scary. Talk about deja vu. Do you know that when I graduated, well, you wouldn't know, but I will tell you.
Go ahead.
When I graduated, Diane, in 1958 from New Trier Township High School in Illinois,
New Trier. I have a friend.
I applied to 2 universities. One was Duke and one was Stanford.
You're kidding me.
And I got into both.
Oh, wow.
And I was oblivious.
Right, to what goes on.
To the whole thing, because it just never came up. But I will say that it was a more innocent and less competitive time in 1958 than it is today.
Oh, I know.
I'm coming up at my 40th Stanford reunion next
year. Oh, I went to Stanford too.
You did?
Yes.
Well, we'll have to compare
that?
notes.
Yeah.
Not only that, one of the student interns we have at the store, who actually is Diana Gabaldon's daughter, Laura goes to Stanford, and I joke around and say, you know, that not only did I go to Stanford, my sister went to Stanford, but we're now putting someone else through Stanford.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's wonderful.
That funny?
That's wonderful. Well, the cookies in the book, because see, that was because I had gone to Stanford, I thought that was the only reason that I could get away with all these jibes that I make at Stanford through the book, because it's just such a joke now that it's such a popular school.
Do you know, it was in Chicago. Stanford was really not that well known. There were other more prestigious, probably Ivy League schools in '58. You would have been, which were still girls' schools, of course, in those days. I think that I wanted to go to Stanford more because of where it was.
Really?
Than what it was. You know, I mean, if you were a survivor of Chicago winters, you wanted to go south.
Oh, listen, I started off at Wellesley. I've never been so cold in my life. I transferred to Stanford, I'm like, I'm in heaven.
Wow.
So,
yeah, I mean, I loved the Bay Area, and I will say that in those years before Vietnam, it was a magical place. And I was in the same class as David Packer.
Oh, yeah, okay.
In fact, our graduation party was held at the Packer House, and that was when Silicon Valley was just. Sure. And you know, when it's going on around you and it's new, you're not on the cutting edge. None of us really, I think, well, few of us in my class had any clue what his father was up to, or where he was going to go with it all. I mean, Hewlett-Packard, what's that?
Well, I know, 2 guys in a garage. Oh,
yeah, I mean, it was really a lot more like that. And I find, looking back on it, you know, I realized that to a great degree, I was a spectator to all of that rather than involved. I often wonder, are all kids like that, or was that just a product of growing up in the 50s, which were really a very apolitical time? I mean, McCarthyism had, I remember my only real political active moment was I was flushed off the steps of the San Francisco City Courthouse protesting HUAC. A lot of us went up there, I think, as freshmen and got involved in that, but it was not a politically active time.
Well, when we were there, my husband and I, we were
younger. So
well, but the Vietnam, in fact, they now call those years at Stanford the most explosive, the most uncertain, the most problematic times in the history of the university, because you had the bombing of Cambodia, the moratorium, some departments closed. It was a very exciting but nerve-wracking and depressing, difficult time. And so each one of the departments, so that the art department, we all met to decide if we were going to go on with classes. The German department decided to suspend classes. Engineering, where my husband was, you know, they checked the IDs at the door before they were, to see who would be allowed to vote and whether the classes went on or not, whether graduation was going to happen and so on. So there was definitely the feeling that we were in the middle of a very electric, explosive time where it was important to put yourself out there to say what you believed in, and that your education was part of what you were putting on the line.
Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. Because the big line when I was there was apathy.
Yeah, well,
you know, we were
not in the late 60s it wasn't.
No,
yeah,
but that 10 years, you know, makes it, ironically enough, my first husband was one of the first casualties in Vietnam.
Oh, gosh.
And I think that maybe one reason I sat out, I don't know why we're doing all this therapy here, was because it was just too painful, you know, to get into. Moving back to your book, sorry about that. The Last Suppers.
Okay, well, The Last Suppers, I'm a lifelong Episcopalian. And I had worked for a number of years as a volunteer in the Episcopal Church, and I was for a long time, I was the only woman on the Board of Examining Chaplains for the Diocese of Colorado. So I had all this material about Episcopal churches, in which I felt, talk about therapy, that was something I needed to write about. And at that time, I had worked in the House of Bishops when the new prayer book, which was 1979, was being approved. And you had this entire group of people who wanted the old prayer book, which was 1928 prayer book. And of course, the joke among Episcopalians is, how many Episcopalians does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is 5. 1 to change the light bulb, and 4 to complain about how it was better before it was changed. And so I put all this material about Episcopalians and the Episcopal Church into the Last Suppers. And you know, what I had realized talking to seminarians and so on is that they would talk to priests, and they would ask the priests where they were working, well, how is this parish? And the priest would invariably answer, there's nothing wrong with this parish that a few well-placed funerals wouldn't fix. And so that's what I thought about this Episcopal Church and the Last Suppers is, why not have a few well-placed funerals? We'll see what happens, see what the fallout is.
What a good idea.
Yeah.
I now see why you knew Winnetka so well, because of the scandal of our rector.
Oh, whoops. Listen, just, you know, scratch the surface, you're going to find scandal. So.
Yes, well, there was one, Dr. Schreiner. Well, moving on. Now we get to Killer Pancake, which we've already described.
Right, the cosmetics. Right.
And now, is the pancake, because it's been so long since I've read it, does that have anything to do with makeup as well?
Yes,
it's the pancake
double
makeup?
entendre, yes.
I thought
Pancake makeup. Actually, it was going to be called The Pancake Murders. And I was walking our youngest son, who's now big 16-year-old, over 6 feet tall, but I used to walk him to the bus stop when he was in elementary school. And it was going to be called The Pancake Murders, and he said, well, why don't you call it Killer Pancake? That's better. So I called Kate Misiak, my editor, and said, how do you like Killer Pancake? And she loved it. So then Joey came in from 1st grade, and then he wanted to do the jacket. so I did the title. So
well, I thought The Last Suppers was an extremely good title.
Oh, thanks.
You know, in fact, all of your titles, I think, are very
thanks.
good. Now, The Main Corpse?
Well, The Main Corpse, what I wanted to deal with in The Main Corpse was mining is a very big part of Colorado life. But also, I had talked to Sandra Dallas, and I don't know if you've ever had Sandra Dallas Atchison come and sign for you, but she writes wonderful books.
She does, and I know the books, but no, she hasn't been here.
Well, she was also for a long time the Denver correspondent for Business Week. So, and she's a very savvy, knowledgeable person and wonderful. So we went out to dinner, and I asked her about financial frauds in Colorado. And she said the biggest one by far is with gold. That most of the gold, like over 90% of the world's gold, has been mined already. It might even be closer to 98%. And yet, you can always make people lose their minds financially over gold. That they'll just believe anything without proof. And so I wanted to look at this whole gold phenomenon within Colorado, people believing in this gold and it being there. And the other thing is that our neighbor raises bloodhounds and has been on Unsolved Mysteries and so on and so forth. So for years I had wanted to use some of his bloodhound stuff. And so I did in the book, because what happens with some bloodhounds is that they're mistreated and then they're abandoned. And so he takes care of them. So that's what Arch has, is this bloodhound who's been treated so badly. And so that's what goes on in The Main Corpse.
I love the lust for gold. You're right.
Yeah.
You could probably, you know, if you look at the Klondike story.
Well, the Klondike, or just even recently in Indonesia. And when I was watching this stuff on CNBC about all these people pouring these millions of dollars into Indonesia, it was this large gold stake. I'd already read about it. I said, this is baloney. I kept saying to my husband, this is going to be a fraud. This is going to be blown out. And it was. It was just all baloney. And so people just lose their minds when you say gold. So.
It's been so interesting over the last few years with all the .com mania. There have been 2 or 3 books, you know, about the tulip mania in Holland.
That's right.
And then a couple of very recent and good historical thrillers about Robert Goddard, whose books I love, and another one named David Liss wrote about the South Sea bubble. Right. You know, all of a sudden we're remembering these financial bubble fraud sorts of things. Fascinating. The grilling season.
Okay. Well,
again, a double entendre.
Right. That's right. And then my agent came up with that title, and I loved it. But what had happened at this point, by the time I got to this point in writing the books, Barbara, is that I was receiving so many letters about this horrible ex-husband that Goldie has. And basically, when you're writing a book, some of this stuff just comes to you. And I had, you know, as I say, I had my very close friends who'd been in these horrible abusive relationships and so on. So I had crafted this ex-husband who was a doctor, Dr. John Richard Corman, whose initials are, you know, make him the jerk. And Goldie and the other ex-wife of the jerk are best friends. But I got so much negative reaction to the jerk that I was thinking about killing him off. And because people kept writing to me. And, you know, you have to worry about some of these letters you get where it's all in caps, kill him off, you know, printed, block letters. And so I was thinking about doing that. And I asked my agent, I said, can I kill the jerk? And she said, no, you can't. You can't. This kind of person doesn't disappear in real life.